This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Razib here with the Unsupervised Learning podcast, and I am here with a returning guest. I mean, I will be jesting some, but mostly it's the guest. So I am here with Dr. Jason Richwhine of the Center for Immigration Studies, where he is you're a resident scholar as opposed to a non-resident scholar. It's a totally different thing, I guess. But in any case, we're here to talk about immigration because that's what we talked about last time, and I think it was like 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It was a while ago, early on in the singular Biden term, and immigration was, stuff was happening with immigration. A lot of immigration happened quantitatively in the Biden administration, and now in the Trump 2 administration, the second Trump term. A lot of stuff is happening with immigration, and there is arguably a lot less immigration happening. With a little bit of Jason, with a little bit of historical, we have a little hindsight vision now. We have a little bit of distance. Can you talk about, when people say the Biden immigration wave was unprecedented, why would you say that people said that?
Well, it's all about the numbers, Razib. I mean, that's what immigration comes down to a lot of times. The actual number of immigrants who came in via either sort of abuse of the parole power or gotaways at the border, unknown crossings. It's however you want to talk about the different categories. The fact is, the foreign-born population went up dramatically, driven by the illegal population. We're estimating it's somewhere around 15 to 16 million now, the illegal population. It had been, before Biden, fairly flat in terms of its growth, because illegal immigration, or the illegal immigrant population, experiences a lot of natural churn. A lot of people don't realize that there's people coming in, but there's also people leaving voluntarily. There's also illegal immigrants who experience natural mortality. In other words, they die. Some of them are legalized. So there's been this churn for a long time, but under Biden, the net impact was a gigantic increase. So we're now at a foreign-born share that's a record high. We've never had any government survey show as large a percentage as we have right now in terms of the foreign-born. And, a lot of people will say, hey, we had the Great Wave back in the late 19th, early 20th century. The foreign-born share was high then. And, we figured it out. We got through that. But the fact is, there's no immigration cutoff in sight, at least when it comes to legal immigration. We had the 24 Act, which effectively ended the Great Wave, and we had very low immigration for a long time. And so when people say that they want to continue immigration legally at the current levels, what they're saying is they want to keep setting records year after year after year with essentially no end in sight.
Yeah. So obviously, there was a lack of control of the border after the end of the pandemic and a couple of years after that, and then I guess the last year or so, the Biden administration tried to get serious because they knew that they had a serious problem here. What do you think that is a distinction that is relevant to make, or do you kind of see it as just an interminable 4 years?
I think the last 6 months or so, the Biden administration, they began to get more serious about this, and it did start to go down. But remember what they were telling us for the first 3.5 years. It was always some excuse unrelated to policy. It was always, first it was, well, we're just getting the immigrants who would have come but for the pandemic, or there's political disorder in Venezuela, or our hands are tied in terms of some court order or something like that. It will go on and on like that, saying that this is not our fault. This is an absolute impossible problem to address. And really, they would say, what we really need is some kind of comprehensive immigration reform, which means, a massive amnesty. But then they did start getting serious about it in the last half of their last year. And of course, what we saw even before Trump came into office, just after he was elected, even just that basic message that it was going to be harder to cross once he's in the White House really helped to dry up that flow, and it just has not returned yet. So I think we've seen the evidence now. We've seen that when Biden took over, if you open up the border, if you loosen restrictions, if you offer parole, if you offer catch and release, you're going to have massive migrant flows at the border. On the other hand, if you don't do those things, if you talk tough and actually back it up with action at the border, you're not going to have these flows.
Yeah, so I guess one thing you're alluding to there is there was an argument about the push and the pull factors. The Biden administration kept bringing up the push aspects, like, oh, there's this reason, that reason, that we have all these people. And I remember, I think it was it was before I think Trump was elected, if I recall. Ezra Klein, the New York Times journalist, founder of Vox.com, actually, I think, interviewed Mayorkas. I think it was Mayorkas, and asked him about this issue. And when Mayorkas was bringing up all these push issues, he started bringing up different nations that were not relevant. And it was interesting that you have I think fair to say, a liberal journalist who was not buying the narrative anymore. I think, I don't know. I don't know what the Biden people thought that they were going to get away with. It seemed pretty obvious to a lot of people. I also know the media and the Biden administration, to some extent, I feel like did try to collude and say that there was really no crisis at the border when, like, I live in Texas. There's videotape, or there's, not video anymore, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, people are streaming what's going on at the border, and they were saying that nothing was going on out of the ordinary, right?
For a long time. I mean, it was always some excuse like that. But as I said, rarely do you get such a clear demonstration in public policy of cause and effect that I think you do here with Trump versus Biden and then Trump again. It really is remarkable.
Well, I mean, okay, this is a while ago now. What were the dynamics in the first Trump administration? Let's say, like, before the pandemic, which, obviously was the last, I don't know, year or so, or 8 months.
Oh, well, Trump actually had significant trouble at first getting control of the border. If you remember, there were some big waves during his time as well. A big part of it were the judicial decisions that they had trouble getting through. But what they really had settled on, and what was working for a while, was the Remain in Mexico policy, which said basically that you can apply for asylum, because that's the law. But if you're going to do that, you have to wait in Mexico while your case is adjudicated. And that really dried up areas that implemented that very quickly, because what most migrants want is simply entry to the United States. Whether they actually win their asylum case or not is less important to them, as long as they can stay in the United States. So once you put in a rule that said you can't get in unless you actually win your case, a lot of them realize this is not going to work very well.
Yeah, and, like, let's make it clear that a lot of these migrants, a lot of these, aspiring illegal immigrants, they're paying a lot of money to travel all the way across the world. They're not, just from Latin America, Latinx America, whatever you want to call it. They'd be Afghanistan, India, China, wherever. They're paying a lot of money. They're coyotes. I mean, they're paying a lot of money along the way. So it's a big investment. And if the investment is not going to pay off, people aren't going to make it, right?
Well, it's not just expensive, it's also dangerous, right? I mean, especially if you're coming from South America, traveling through places like Panama, there are areas where robbery is common, rape, unfortunately, is common as well. In fact, you hear some stories that it's basically an accepted part of the price that you have to pay if you're a female, who wants to travel that far. So it's a really difficult thing. And we don't want to be encouraging people to make this trip with the false premise that they're going to be able to get into the United States and stay. I think that's one of the worst things you can do in terms of humanitarian perspective.
Well, I mean, weren't there like whole nations that were given exemptions periodically too, like in terms of giving people an incentive?
Oh, well, I mean, the parole program under Biden, was abused like no other president has abused it. So the parole has been in the law for a long time, which says that there are, on a case by case basis, the president or the DHS secretary is allowed to admit someone temporarily. What Biden did, and really what Mayorkas did, was use the parole power to create a completely parallel immigration system operating alongside the Immigration and Nationality Act. The INA, establishes the number of visas you can have for various categories. What Mayorkas did was use the parole power to essentially set his own numbers. He basically said, I'm going to admit anyone I want from any place I want at any time I want, and I'm going to give them parole. And I'll just kind of hand wave at the case by case requirement. And so you had, particular people from countries like Venezuela who were allowed to come under parole programs and stay. It's supposed to be temporary, but I think most people understand that it's not really a temporary thing, or not intended to be.
Yeah, and so you had all these illegal immigration illegal immigrants coming in. So you had the dynamic of people coming across the border. Border was relatively lax. They were kind of signaling to the border patrol to chill out. They were told not to get on horses and chase people. All these things, right? Okay, so that's one aspect. The other aspect, I guess, is once they get into this country, in terms of the way ICE behaved, obviously there's been a massive change, at least optically. One of my hypotheses, because people are saying like, oh, why don't they target the gangsters? Why are they going to schools, or why are they going to places of work and all these things and targeting? I feel like they're going for some edge cases that they normally wouldn't have gone for in the past. And my hypothesis is that they're doing this to really, really discourage people from staying, because if they can deport someone, who's been, not causing too much problem for 40 years or something, then, if you're a newcomer who's up to no good, you're definitely going to get deported. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, that certainly would be a sound strategy if you're trying to reduce the illegal population. Whether that is the strategy, I think, is less clear. I think that there's obviously some internal tensions going on in the administration on that question. If you remember, not too long ago, there was a memo put out by someone at DHS, which said, "Hey, we're going to lay off agriculture, restaurants, and hotels." And I know some people, who in DHS, and talking with them, they said, we didn't even know if this guy had the authority to issue this memo. We just kind of heard about it from someone, and then it ended up getting revoked. But now the president is still talking about some kind of possible administrative amnesty for certain industries. So there's a kind of tension, I think, even within Donald Trump's brain on this question. And it's a problem, right? Because as you said, a sound strategy for reducing the illegal population is not that we're going to physically pick up every illegal immigrant in the country and physically move him or her out of the country. That would be a very difficult thing. What you want to do is use deportations in a way that suggests to people who are here, just as you said, that they would be better off leaving on their own terms than risking a deportation process, which is much less pleasant for them. That's part of it. And I think that part has been okay so far. I think probably the best part has been the border security, because as we talked about, that natural churn in the illegal population, you're cutting off one of the major inflows that way with better border security. So deportations are good. Border security is good. What I'd like to see more of is prosecuting employers of illegal labor. I think you don't have to make too many examples before employers start getting really worried about that. And I think an area where the administration has done very poorly is on the issue of E-Verify. That's the system where employers can quickly verify whether their employees are eligible to work in the United States. I have not seen movement on that to make that a universal requirement, even though almost everyone acknowledges that it's a major tool, not a panacea, but a major tool for enforcement. And the other, which I've already mentioned, the suggestions of administrative amnesty, that is a major blunder. You have to make people think that they don't have much of a future in the United States. And if you go around saying we're going to offer an administrative amnesty to what we estimated to be 2 million illegal aliens, if you add up agriculture, restaurants, and hotels, boy, that's exactly the wrong message. And we're still hearing it. In fact, I've even heard that there's some potential push for legislation in this regard. That's just shooting yourself in the foot.
Okay, so yeah, the employer aspect traditionally, the reason that never gets done is, the modern Democratic Party, a little bit contrary to its unionized past, is, pretty favorable to high levels of immigration, and the Republican Party is the party of business. In particular, look, I don't think IBM has a lot of illegal immigrants. It has a lot of W2 employees, but a lot of the small businesses, probably actually, like restaurants and whatnot, and do have chamber of commerce types. Is that your impression still?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I think that's what's going on. There's a frustration that a lot of people have in this regard, which is that politicians, especially Republican politicians, will support every immigration enforcement measure except the ones that work. That it's really an issue, and you can tell what does work based on the level of opposition that it engenders. And so the border wall, a border wall is nice. I think it would be somewhat helpful, but the fact that there's not much opposition to it in the Republican Party, even the business community, tells you that it's not the real problem. And yet, E-Verify, you will never see businessmen get more upset than when you propose universal E-Verify. That's the key. That's the tell right there. That's what you want to focus on if you can. But there are too many Republican politicians who are listening to those businessmen claim that somehow whole industries will collapse without illegal labor, which makes little sense from an economic perspective. But they've bought into it. They've bought into it even in places where you think Republicans are best, like Florida. They've had a lot of good legislation, but even with E-Verify, they were unable to get E-Verify passed on a universal basis. And the reason is, this businesses just they insist that they need those illegal workers.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I'm going to use an analogy here. To be fair, to those businesses, it's a little bit like if you are, let's say you move to California and, you bought a house, assuming your property taxes are never going to get raised, and you have the system. And I know that, the property tax system is, it's been modified in some ways. You can't, for example, inherit your parents' taxes easily. But my point here is, when it comes to housing, for example, there's a certain housing regime, in particular in the blue states, that Americans take for granted, and they make financial investment decisions based on those that regime. And so if you changed it, if you allowed, for example, to build housing in California, the rate of increase would decrease. The investment, you would not be able to be collecting the rents, and maybe you made the wrong decision now, retrospectively. So obviously there's a resistance in the policy realm of voters in California who are established to changing the status quo, right? And so, I think in defense of some of these small business people, like if you own a restaurant and you don't have, quote unquote hardy working illegals, if you don't, avail yourself of the whole labor force, like, what are you doing? That it's going to be a little difficult. And so you just do what everyone else is doing, and then all of a sudden the federal government changes the rules and regulations. So I'm very sympathetic to a lot of candidly. I don't really want to express my own political views too much because it's about you, Jason. You know this stuff, but I'm sympathetic to, we got to control our borders, and obviously, it doesn't. You're right. It doesn't seem like that onerous to have E-Verify go. I'm mean, I'll just tell the listener, like, since I last talked to you, I now work at a company where I have to be involved in hiring, and it's not that big of a deal. It's not like, a small business or agricultural or anything like that. It's tech, but still, you do basic things, making background checks, okay, that's all fine. But like doing it in this executive way, kind of helter skelter with mixed messages, I do think, this is not optimal. You know what I'm saying? And, figuring it out to do it with legislation would obviously be better. And also maybe in a graduated way over a couple of years, make the change and allow people to adapt. What do you say to that? To my listeners out there with small businesses who are like, pulling their hair out.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you that, when you've had non-enforcement or very weak enforcement of existing laws for a long time, that people are going to adapt to that to some degree, and that trying to adapt to a different environment can be hard. I would point out though that, one difference here between the immigration situation and your analogy to say property taxes is that since the Reagan amnesty, it's been illegal to hire illegal aliens, right? Knowingly hire illegal aliens. And so it's a little different when you say, well, we know what the law is, but we don't think it's being enforced, so we're going to violate it, versus saying, we're just relying on what the law says right now in terms of how property taxes might go up or not. But I would also say that so much of the proposals related to e-verify and the like involve a phase-in process. I mean, just as you said, you're going to have a kind of gradual change, and even with updating the enforcement, even with actually being serious about enforcement now, it's going to be a fairly slow process, I think, just naturally. And so, yeah, sure. I mean, phase it in ways that are going to work, but I don't think that's the position. I don't think you have businesses saying, "Oh, we understand. Just give us a few years." But what they're saying is, we want to hire these people indefinitely. So that's really the big problem. And the other thing, of course, too, is that in terms of competition, if you're the only roofing contractor who's not hiring illegal labor, then I can obviously see how you're going to be in a bad competitive situation. But if no one has illegal labor available, you're all kind of in the same boat, and there's an adjustment, yes, but it doesn't mean that you personally are going to have to go out of business.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So I guess we're talking about the numbers here, and I just actually pulled up the number of U.S. legal permanent residents by fiscal year. I guess the government has data on this back to 1820. It looks like so I mean, I think these are people that are coming in every year, and it seems like there was a pause, a de facto pause during the pandemic of new people coming in for like about a year or so, and then it went back up. It looks like it's been at about the approximately same absolute level since about the early 2000, like maybe like around year 2000 or so, right?
Yeah.
That's what it looks like to me. So are we having a situation where these numbers that you're talking about of foreign born, it was driven by what are now, and just so the listeners who are not American know, I mean, we're saying illegal immigrants. I don't really care what you want to call them. You could call them booga booga or whatever. But the media prefers undocumented immigrants. So if you're not American and you're a little confused by the terminology, it's one of those PC war to political correctness things. So whatever, undocumented, illegal, people without papers, whatever you want to say, those are the people that are driving this big immigration boom over the since the pandemic, right?
Yes, right. During the Biden administration, it was largely illegal aliens that pushed up the numbers.
I mean, and that's why I think people were upset in large. I mean, not that like people are sanguine about legal migration, but the reality is, people are really, really not excited about people just showing up and staying in the country, right? And obviously, I don't, I mean, like for example, I mean, this is like a petty complaint, but it's just hard to travel to New York City, and like if you don't have a friend's place you can stay to, it's just a pain in the butt. If it's not business travel, because it's so expensive now, because the unions, that involved in building hotels and stuff like that, they've like reduced supply. and then they shut down Airbnb, and then they have all of these immigrants that they're housing in the hotels. And so for me, that's just like really, really obvious manifestation of just a lot of people. We don't have housing for these people. They can't get distributed, and they're staying, in these. I guess they're asylum seekers. Is that what they are?
In many cases, yes. I mean, of course, New York City has a lot of problems that go beyond immigration, so I don't want to chalk it all up to that. But yes, of course, when you have so many people coming in so quickly, it's hard to adapt. I mean, we talked about adaptation here, and putting them up in hotels. There was an NBER paper, looking at the cost of this. I think it was over $100,000, per immigrant family. It's a huge problem, even to the point where some of Biden's Democratic allies in these cities, began publicly complaining about it, that this is unsustainable. And I think, with the Biden administration, had there been more, to put it politely, more engaged leadership at the top, I think that probably this would not have happened. I think that Joe Biden, when he had all of his wits about him in his younger years, would have recognized the major political problem that had been created by his DHS and would have put a stop to it. But when he's so disengaged on a day-to-day level on the policymaking side, I think he just kind of let the progressive activists run wild in that regard, and that's what we got.
Yeah, and so here we are. We have a new administration, quite different. Trump, to be candid, has a very finite set of deep political beliefs. But one of them, along with tariffs, does seem to be controlling our borders and immigration. And we've been talking about the undocumented / illegal problem. The reality is, I feel like outside of the 20% most liberal, you know, portion of the population, there's a broad consensus that you got to get your border in check, and you got to control the people coming in. I guess the number one question I have, like as we move on beyond this, though, is like, it does seem like the first world as a whole needs to figure out what the hell asylum is, because for people who don't know, 98% of, I mean, and I don't know if the literal number, but it's not that far off, of asylum applicants to first world countries are fake. They lie. They're not, and everyone knows they lie, and they know you lie, and the governments know that they know. I mean, the whole thing is just a scam. And I think, I will tell you, like, I'm an immigrant. My family came here when I was very, very small, and we came through. My dad was a graduate student, and I actually remember, not in detail, but I remember my dad talking about the '86 amnesty, and he was actually like quite agitated because we were going through, basically we were going through sponsorship that was costing money, and he heard of people he knew of a guy who had like jumped like off some merchant marine ship and like basically just was illegal, and he got in here, whatever, that way. And then there were other people he heard who said that they were being persecuted, and he knew it was bullshit. And it's just really frustrating for, I think, everybody actually, who's not taking advantage of the system. Do you know, or do you think that there's going to be a discussion about this? Because it's just, I just think everyone knows it's fake.
Asylum is one of our biggest problems legally. Mark Krikorian, who I'm sure you know, is the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies, where I work, has been really harping on this, and I think he's right to do so. It's the bane, really, I think, of not just the United States, but most Western countries that are trying to deal with controlling these flows, but under the constraint of an asylum system that was not designed by any means at all to handle these kinds of large flows of economic migrants. These are for largely political persecutions that are going on and meant to be for small numbers of people. That's how our asylum system was designed. It does not work for today's world. It needs to be reformed. And as long as it's not, we're going to be susceptible to these kinds of flows without a lot of very careful attention paid to the border.
All right, let's switch to legal immigration. which again, that is also a mess. The only positive thing that I have to say about our legal immigration system is that it is much more rational than the UK's immigration system. But I think I can say that about everything, or everybody, when it comes to immigration. UK system is very crazy. But we have a system with diversity lottery, and then we have the sponsorships of family-based reunification, and then we have the employment-based, kind of like skills-based system. So, and the quotas are allotted by the countries in all sorts of ways. I think just they're kind of somewhat independent of population. Okay, so we have the system here. Traditionally, I think America has had a better system than a lot of, say, continental Europe, which was ad hoc asylees, instead of skills. But there's been some debate over that, and there are many people who want a full immigration pause. Now, there are people online that are, okay. I think people need to be careful about like confusing the people online with like real people. So if you listen to, liberals frankly got screwed by listening too much to Twitter and like forgetting that most people are not crazy in 2020, and that they do not want reparations and disbanding police and communist utopia, a communist anarchy. If you look online, there are people who literally will say we need to remove every single person who has ancestry from after 1870 in the United States. Whatever. I'm actually using a real example from some stupid person in a group chat where I pointed out that everybody but them would be gone from the group chat. I'm just like, this is this is like retarded LARPing. I mean, candidly, right? And that's not a
1870. What a
Yeah.
squish.
I think
Not
they're
1830.
not. I think their last ancestor arrived right after the Civil War. I think it was
I see.
suspiciously precise. Okay, I mean, like real hardcore people go to 1790. You know what I'm saying? So which is like the the Naturalization Act, and that's when like the old stock Americans are here and the Black Americans. It's basically that would be it, right? Okay, so you have these like crazy ideas, but we're gonna be live in the real world in this discussion. And so, we can have a discussion about immigration rates and whatnot. There are some people who legitimately, though, so like Peter Brimlow, the former, he founded VDare. The site does not exist anymore, but, people like Peter Brimlow, but not just Peter Brimlow, other people, they talk about immigration pause, okay? Which I'm assuming is not a literal pause, but, like in terms of like zero people, it would be like they would still let in like the John von Neumanns of the world, but a very, very small number, right? Can you talk about, like they're even, like for example, I'll give you a concrete example of someone that maybe a lot of people don't know. The Breaking Points YouTube show, Sagar and Jetty, who is Indian American, his parents are immigrants, he has said we need a pause, but I mean, Tucker Carlson was his mentor. He came on a Daily Caller, so it should be a total surprise. I want to ask you though, like, how feasible is a pause in terms of like, I mean, do you guys at the CIS have a position on it? I mean, it's not really a mainstream Republican position yet, at least among the legislative class, and I'm frankly skeptical it would happen. But what do you think about that? What do you think about the pause idea?
Well, I mean, feasibility, of course, is an issue by itself, and even getting people to talk about legal immigration is difficult. One of the things we try to do at the center is point out that there's actually not as much difference between legal and illegal as some people think. I think the objection to illegal on the grounds that it flouts our laws and such is very well taken. But in terms of the impacts, the political, economic, social impacts of immigration, legal has many of the same effects. Okay, so on this question of moratorium, my view is that, when most people who say moratorium, I think what they mean is zero net immigration. And again, I would go back again to that point about churn in the foreign-born population. It's not even just illegal, some legal immigrants as well. You have some temporary people here and so on who may leave. And so if you were to limit illegal immigration to uh, nuclear family, in other words, spouses and minor children, and then you had the John von Neumann program, right? The super smart Einstein type immigrants who are not going to be all that numerous, and you can also even make allowances for a small number of refugees who genuinely have no other place to go, or they're not just showing up here for economic reasons. You can reduce the number of people coming in to the point where the net effect is somewhere around zero because there are people coming out as well. I think that's what most people mean when they say moratorium or something along those lines. So yeah, I mean, I don't know the number has to be zero, even net, but I do want to see legal immigration much reduced. Again, I mean, we're at this record level here, and the last time we had a record level, we had a long period of low immigration to try to adapt to it. And there's simply nothing like that on the horizon right now.
Well, you're talking about the 1924 National Origins Act,
Right.
which really ended the last big great wave before, well, I mean, let's just call the current post-65 era, which is, I mean, this is a long time now, another great wave. And so there was about like approximately a 50-year period where rates were low and, they were restricted by nation based on like the ethnic balance, I think the national balance of like 1890, I believe. So it was a little before, but, it was biased to Northwestern Europe and whatnot. And so that's how that would work. Do we have, I mean, I know that you are focused on the United States. Do we have a developed nation right now that has that sort of policy of restriction? I've heard of mixed things about Japan, for example, Japan or South Korea, because I know that Japan is starting to let in Asians that look to Western people, they look like kind of Asian and Japanese, so they don't see them, but like the Japanese are quite aware of them. I mean, what do you know about that sort of thing?
Oh, I mean, you're right. Japan had for a long time has had a very restrictive policy. I think by Western standards, it still does, but yeah, it is starting to loosen up a bit. But I mean, if you look at the demographics of Japan, I mean, it's obviously far more homogeneous than most Western countries these days. South Korea is another country that has loosened recently, but still is reasonably homogeneous. Israel, of course, is a country that has a very restrictive immigration policy. And so, it certainly can be done. Now, I realize, of course, people will point to Japan and say, well, yeah, I mean, their population is dying. They're dying as a people. And I agree that low fertility is a tremendous problem in the world. But I think if you talk to the Japanese, I don't think they see as a solution, being, essentially replaced demographically by some other peoples. And, you can do that. I mean, the problem is it would be so much healthier for societies to have lots of children, everyone to have a lot more children. And this collapse recently, it's hard to explain, but it's a big problem. And I think it's largely independent of immigration. I've done some work recently pointing out some papers that suggest a link, not a huge link, but some effect of immigration on actually reducing native fertility for a variety of reasons, partially related to housing prices and other things. But it's a problem that I think transcends immigration, and we have to deal with it.
Yeah. I do have an idea, though. What if the Japanese create humaniform robots that are imbued with Japanese culture? So they are replaced by Japanese robots. Would they prefer that to being replaced by, say, Filipino people? This is an interesting, I think, question.
I would guess that they would, but I'm no expert on Japanese culture, so yeah.
I'm sorry. I was like, this is the jest part of the podcast.
Right. Well, I don't know. I mean, is it?
What if there's some people out there that are like, oh, our kids are being brainwashed by the liberals. Maybe they would prefer Confederate robots. It's like.
Right.
All right. So I want to get into like high skill and H-1B and all this stuff, because that was like a whole thing that blew up on the internet in like December, mostly focused on Indians because like they overwhelmed the H-1B system. And it seems like Trump is, he's got two wolves in him. People like Bannon I mean, Bannon, people like Bannon, Richard Spencer, whatever. There's certain people with like more ethno-nationalist bent. They are not big fans of high skill migration as a whole, because they're worried about elite replacement.
Mhm.
You have, going back say 15 years, like a while now, early on. I think you've shown some positive attitudes towards high skilled immigration. So I think part of the issue with high skilled immigration is there's one question: how high skilled are these people? Is the system being abused? Which I think to some extent most people can say yes, because I think everyone who is familiar with high skilled immigration knows there's a wide variance. Like, there are Ph.D. artificial intelligence people where, okay, like if they're leaving the United States, frankly, it's a problem, but then there's other people that work at some, like, they're code monkeys at some like shop, and like, what's going on here with the H-1B slot? And like a lot of times when you can get H-1B slots, it's like, corporate power. Like liberals, the left will complain about corporate power. I mean, that's an issue of corporate power, right? But you know, as I said, there are people who don't want. I mean, I was seeing today, or like not today, but a couple of days ago, a doctor, legislator, I think Dr. Murphy or something, Republican from North Carolina, and he was complaining about foreign doctors, and I mean, honestly, first of all, my understanding is foreign doctors have to jump through extra hoops because it is understood that medical education in a lot of countries is not as good as in the US. And so they have like, extra hoops that they have to jump through. It is also not optimal when the doctor has a strong accent, but I also think, frankly, most Americans have encountered foreign doctors, and I mean, they're not like that incompetent, I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, we have affirmative action, and I've heard people say that they don't want doctors, frankly, of underrepresented minorities. I've never heard someone say, "I don't want my surgeon to be foreign." Okay, so I think that honestly, I'm going to say that's fake. I don't know what's going on. I think like American doctors have an incentive not to have foreign doctors because that's guaranteed employment, and that's a high salary. I actually think we should deregulate and loosen up a lot of medical services beyond doctors to make healthcare somewhat cheaper. That's a different discussion. But there are certain aspects of the high skill debate where I'm thinking like, okay, like people are just like piggybacking onto this because they have their own hobby horses. And there's other aspects that are real. I've been talking, like, tell me what you think. I know you've thought about this, like you've looked at, I mean, you've like, you got in trouble with the IQ stuff over a decade ago. I think it'd be more kosher now, but whatever. Like, what do you think about all of this? I threw a lot out there.
There's a lot there. Um, I think, we talked about the Einsteins and the von Neumanns, and I don't think there's going to be much objection from anyone, on that score. And you also mentioned, immigrants with STEM PhDs from U.S. universities. And that's obviously a quite elite group. And look, it's a small group. And, it can't possibly characterize most of the so-called high skill immigrants that we receive. I mean, I would emphasize one of the points you brought up there, which is this question of how high skill are they? And the answer is, I think, on average, not especially high skill. I think if you look at the data we have based on, skill test scores and all that we've been able to look at, it looks like it's sort of just like the average college graduate. And if you have, especially a foreign degree, that's a real penalty in terms of skills compared to having a U.S. degree for immigrants. And we had this big debate back around Christmas time, I guess, right, with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, kind of taking the side of the tech industry here. And one thing you hear from them over and over and over again is the idea of a shortage of tech workers. It's so hard to square those claims with any sort of economic data. And this has been the case forever, right? That basically, if you think that demand is outstripping supply, what happens to the price? I mean, this is sort of obvious, right? The price should go up. And in this case, the price is the wage. It's the amount that you pay people. But you can look at Census Bureau data. You can look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data, as we did, which includes both wages and benefits of STEM workers. We got that data all the way back to 2008. and the compensation is basically flat once you adjust for inflation. Basically flat. You don't see this so-called shortage, which of course shouldn't really exist in a free market anyway. And one thing I did to try to drive this home recently is I compared the compensation for STEM workers with the price of eggs in the United States, right? Because we all know that eggs prices went way up. Around, I think they peaked in January of this year, because there was a genuine supply shock. What you had was, I think it was bird flu that was causing a bunch of herds to be slaughtered, and so you had demand for eggs really outstripping supply. And if you graph that, you can easily see this big spike, right? Big increase in the price of eggs, and you can circle that on the graph and say, yep, there it is. There's demand outstripping supply. If you put the compensation of STEM workers on the same graph and you see this flat line, I think it really brings into stark relief for people that this idea of a shortage is just not based in reality. So that's I think one issue that I think they really need to get over. I think that the tech lobby needs to get over this question and start talking about genuine skills that they might need as opposed to tech workers. When I did a report on foreign-born PhDs or foreign-born residents in American PhD programs, what I found was that in some of the literature, what they noted was this sort of change in philosophy sometime in the 1990s that tech companies had. Because during the tech boom of the mid to late 1990s, the demand for tech workers definitely went up. And yet the compensation for them was still not comparable to what the highest skill people could get in industries like law and finance. And so the tech companies were kind of at a crossroads. Do we up our compensation to compete with the law firms and the financial companies in order to get the smartest people, or do we go the immigration route? And of course, we all know what they really did. And once you do that, then it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that we need. I'm using scare quotes right now, that we need immigrants to work in these industries. Well, yes, I mean if you have these visas deliberately designed to bring people into a particular industry and you use them repeatedly to get cheaper labor, then of course it'll appear as if you need them. But the fact is we did not need them prior to the 1990s. Remember, Silicon Valley wasn't built by immigrants in a large part. And I think we can do without the average H-1B people, even as we welcome the STEM PhDs and so on.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is quality control is of the essence here. I do think I mean, just candidly, there are some problems here. Obviously, as I said, like we know that there are a fair number of H-1Bs that just, a fair number of skilled immigration slots that are going to people that are just like, okay, like that's not like, it's like a replacement level at best, like college graduates, whatever, Then there are people who are, and I don't think that this is like a great quantity, but you said earlier, that these instances of raids, they're discouraging the undocumented, the illegal people, right? Unfortunately, our immigration system, the way it's set up, there are like, I mean, I know personally of high quality researchers that would be great to have in this country in fields like genetics or artificial intelligence, who just have decided to pass, and obviously I don't think that these are a huge number, but the problem is what you said earlier, like once you have like some signal, once you have a scare story, then everybody else is like very risk averse, right? And so I do think that there's going to be a problem if the system's not rationalized, because there are some strategic sectors where I think we probably do need the people. I mean, you're talking about we didn't need, we had like superstars, and there were still like actually like a fair number of like really, really high level people. I mean, maybe not the Martians, from Hungary in the 1930s, but some pretty high level people that came to the United States even after World War II, right? And that's actually like even before 1965, some Asians came to this country because of that, because they were just like, okay, whatever, like we're gonna let them in, So that hopefully will still happen, but when we had the competition with the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union was producing a fair number of physicists, but they were kicking out the Jews were leaving. I think our competition right now, frankly, is China, and they are cranking a lot of STEM PhDs. Now, are they all high quality? No, obviously not, but they have a massive baseline population, about 3 times that of the United States, right? And so I personally think that the comparison to the post World War II era is probably not apt, because we had a big comparative advantage to the rest of the world. And we could call the shots in a very specific way, right? I think we have a little less slack, and so I think we have to actually think more intelligently. And in a few areas that I know of action that's happening, there are high quality people that, frankly, are just like. Well, the issue is, if you're a high quality person, depending on the country, like if you're like an artificial intelligence researcher in the Republic of Congo, yeah, you definitely want to like get the hell out of your country. You could probably get a spot in England, and that's fine. Uh, if you're a high quality researcher in China, there's actually like spots in China that you can now have. And so I think we just need to think a little bit rationally about that, because we're not quite in the position that we were in the 20th century. Although I have to say, we're doing pretty well. Since the 2008 financial crisis, we have bounced back. Although I think that, again, unrelated to what we're talking about here, we did do a little bit of a debt-driven economic growth, and I don't know how sustainable that's going to be, right? So, what do you think about some of the stuff that I'm saying there?
Well, I think that the rivalry with China touches on a lot of different issues. I think that in some cases go beyond immigration. The extent to which we're competing and the extent to which that competition will be determined by, whom we recruit into our respective countries, I think is a difficult one. I think there's probably a lot more to it than that. I would also point out, though, that, it's not like, if you want to think about it as the Western world versus China, if that's the kind of division you want to make, then of course the United States has access to more than just Americans, right? We have Western Europe and Canada and Australia and so on. And so I think it probably has to be thought of in that regard if you really want to have a kind of, technological competition model of all of this. I would also I would add, one point we haven't talked about much here is I don't think that you can separate the economics from the culture, even in this particular case. I mean, you can do as much economic analysis as you want about, how remarkably beneficial even the average H-1B might be. But, you alluded to the idea of elite replacement. I may not put it that way exactly, but I think there's definitely an issue that in other contexts, people are happy to acknowledge. It always goes like this, right? The phrase is always, that's why we have Trump, right? Remember that phrase that we use for almost everything? And one of those, that's why we have Trump situations, is the disconnect, the growing disconnect culturally, politically, socially, between elites and average Americans. And I think, boy, if there's any way to really, throw gasoline on that fire, it's to bring in immigrants who have no real cultural connection to the United States historically, and put them into those positions of high influence within a leading economic sector. Boy, that really is just, sparking more of those flames.
Yeah, I mean, so Peter Brimlow, just to name one, um, wants reintroduction of National Origins Act. And I mean, is that on anyone's like? So I mean, CIS, Center for Information Studies. I think that, like, there's another organization called FAIR. There's some immigration control organizations out there. Not too many, but there are some. You guys put out policy papers and have thoughts. You're not like just like tweeting or writing opinion columns. You're doing some analyses. Is there consideration of this, in the policy world of immigration?
When Trump, boy, I'm forgetting now what it was. There was some Trump policy, but was it public charge? I'm trying to think which one it was, where somebody did some analysis and found that, like, the proportion of immigrants who are from Europe would go up from some small number to some slightly larger number, but still, easily the minority. And Nancy Pelosi described his policy as making America white again. I think there's quite a bit of pushback against any kind of ethnically conscious immigration policy, at least insofar as it might increase the proportion of Europeans in that regard. National origins, I think, is fascinating, even historically, because I've always looked at it from the 1924 perspective as the WASPs, essentially, who were in charge briefly at that point, being fair-minded in a way. They say, we're not going to just limit this to the people who we think are best. Instead, we're going to do is we're going to just have proportional. We're going to try to freeze the ethnic composition of the United States going forward. For a variety of reasons we don't have to get into, it really didn't work very well at all. But I think that whole history is interesting. But in the modern context, boy, I mean, I'm just so much more interested in the numbers. If you get the numbers down, that automatically, reduces the kind of rapid demographic change that we see because of immigration.
Well, I mean, let's talk about. I saw, you and Mark Krikorian and the people at the CIS. I mean, what kind of numbers do you want? Let's say, whatever we got like millions. We got what, like a 1 to 2 million, like something like 1.5 million per year of like legal, right? Like, do you guys want to go down to 100,000? What are you targeting here?
Well, the new permanent residents, new green card holders, those would be people either coming into the country on a green card or they're on some other visa and they adjust status to a green card. That is about 1 to 1.1 million a year, as we talked about before, and that has been fairly steady for a while now. I'll give you two answers. The first answer is, boy, I would settle for any kind of reduction. Even a gesture at reduction in that would be useful for us going forward because it establishes that, hey, numbers matter and we think it's too high. I mean, if we could just get rid of, say, the diversity lottery, which is only like 50,000 people or something. I might have that wrong, but it's not a large number. And yet, even just to get rid of that, this thoroughly irrational policy would be a good stepping stone, toward actually getting people to talk about numbers. Now, what's the ideal? Well, the ideal is what I mentioned before. It's going down to just the nuclear family reunification, the Einsteins, and a limited number of refugees. Now, how many that would be in terms of net? It would probably be net zero. It would not be net zero immediately, but might get there eventually. It's unclear exactly what the equilibrium would be, but it'll be a lot less than 1.1 million.
Okay. And so, we have, well, I don't know. I mean, historically, the, the party that has the presidency loses in the off year. Probably they will. Although, the Democrats are, I was, Harry Etten at CNN was looking at the polls. He's like, Democrats are not in the same position they were in 2018 or 2006. I think partly because the party itself is just like has no message right now, and is kind of out of sorts. But it is not quite 2026 yet. People are not really paying attention. So if I had to bet money, I would bet that the Republicans lose the House. They have a very, very slim majority. So that probably means legislation, is not going to happen after that, right? Okay, so assuming that, in terms of immigration, it doesn't look like there's going to be any legislation, right? What do you think?
Well, remember that Republicans won the generic House vote in 2024 by, what was it, close to 3 points or so? It was a significant win, and yet they just barely eked out a majority. So it's very difficult to see how they would not lose the majority in 2026. But anyway, in terms of legislation, Razib, this goes back to my longstanding critique of Congress, which is that they seem to have set up the rules so that they don't have to legislate. They don't want to actually use their own power. The founders envisioned 3 branches kind of vying for power. No one branch gaining ascendancy because they're all trying to assert their own legitimacy and their own influence. But Congress has largely abdicated its role as the legislative branch. It wants the courts and the executive to fight things out for policy. And I've got to say, I think one of the major reasons for that, not the only one, but one of the major reasons is the filibuster. The filibuster, in my opinion, is ridiculous. Okay, the idea that a political party can run on a particular platform and win majorities in both houses and win the White House and still be unable to implement that platform, not because they got cold feet, but just because institutionally they simply cannot do it. They want a majority, but they're not allowed to implement it. It doesn't work. And there are people who say, no, the filibuster is good because, hey, you look, if Congress chooses not to act, well, we all just have to respect that. They have chosen to go with the status quo. But as I said, the old cliche about a pouring a vacuum, right, in terms of what power does. Once Congress steps aside, inevitably the courts and the executive are going to try to increase their power to move into that space, and that's what you see now. And so, do I think legislation is not coming because Democrats are going to win back the House? No, I think legislation is not coming because structurally, institutionally, Congress simply is not built these days to pass controversial legislation.
Yeah, it seems like it's got one big thing that can pass every term now. It's like
Well, but even that is highly constrained in terms of what it can be. I mean, we have to sit back and defer to someone called the Senate parliamentarian as to what's allowed to be in the bill or not. Even if a solid majority of senators want that provision in the bill, it can't be because they have decided that the Senate parliamentarian is the person who really is in charge of their body and not them. So it's a ridiculous application.
Well, in terms of bills, the big beautiful bill apparently has a lot of money for immigration enforcement. Is that correct? Like, how are you feeling about that?
Oh yeah, I mean that goes back to the enforcement we were talking about earlier. I think it will definitely help them ramp up the deportations, and then also try to double down on the border security they've already established. That's all very good. I'm glad for it. But as I said, um, you know, a more effective approach to reducing the illegal population goes beyond deportations. Those are important, physical deportations, but also prosecuting employers for hiring illegal labor, e-verify, and for goodness sake, don't hint that you're going to pass an amnesty.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about we haven't talked about it, and I know you probably have to go soon, but what do you think about what was I gonna say? What do you think about the birthright stuff? I know it's stuck in the courts. I mean, do you guys have a position on the birthright citizenship? That's all across the organization. Just so the listeners know, I know I have non-American listeners, so I have to make this clear. If you're not in the new world, because in the old world it's different. But we have birthright citizenship, which means that um, if someone is born in the United States, they are a natural born citizen. This is common in the Western Hemisphere. Actually, it's pretty much the norm. It is not very common in the old world. In fact, some of the countries that didn't have it got rid of it recently, I think. But anyway, we have like a big controversy in the United States because the whole idea of anchor babies, people illegal, they come here and they have children, and their children are citizens, which is like really confusing to people in a lot of nation states in the old world, right? And so Trump administration and the immigration restriction people, a lot of them want to get rid of birthright citizenship because that way we have more control, as opposed to just like by fiat, like, you just show up here illegally and you give birth and, whatever, right? So what do you think about this?
Well, on strictly a policy level, I mean, I think birthright citizenship might have been something that worked reasonably well in the absence of this phenomenon we call illegal immigration. And that's, of course, where the 14th Amendment language comes from. It comes from a context where illegal immigration simply didn't exist in the way it does today. When you have illegal immigration, birthright citizenship makes very little sense. I think the idea that someone could give birth on U.S. soil who is not here through any kind of authorization, maybe has been here for only a few months, and that woman gives birth, and that person is a United States citizen. I don't think most people are really going to defend that as a rational policy, but nonetheless, we are constrained for sure by not only the 14th Amendment but by the interpretations of it over time. I very much doubt that the Trump administration will win this on the merits at the Supreme Court. I think probably the best thing they could hope for is some kind of ruling that perhaps opens the door for maybe Congress to revisit this issue. The worst ruling, of course, would be to strictly interpret the 14th Amendment as requiring it. But either way, I don't see it as an issue that's going very far because, again, remember, Congress doesn't really pass legislation of much importance. And so, I don't know. I certainly would never have written the law this way, but at the same time, our chances of changing it are still low. And at the end of the day, it's probably not the most important aspect of immigration anyway.
Mm. Well, we've been talking for a while, so I should let you go, but I want to ask you real quickly.
Mhm.
Last question, like really the last question. So, we've been talking about the United States. Obviously, this is, the numbers here inside out. But, we've had issues in Australia and definitely Canada and the UK. It looks like the Western world is kind of turning against immigration, at least, the elite consensus a little bit, definitely at the popular, level. I, I gotta ask about Canada, like, back when, I don't know, when I was reading Brimlow's website in the early 2000s, like 20 years ago, actually, like, they kind of said, they weren't necessarily supportive of Canada's system, but, they had this great point system and, it wasn't as like, there weren't like unskilled, you know, immigrants that were like, all over the country and all this stuff. But like the last like under the Trudeau regime, under the Trudeau administration, it's like it's been a total like disaster. What happened? Do you know what happened? I haven't kept track of it because like I don't know what's going on in Canada.
I mean, the most I know is again, it's the numbers. I mean, they have pursued such a high level of immigration relative to their population. I mean, we think of immigration being high in the United States, but as a percentage of the population, I think immigration to Canada is much higher. At least that's my understanding. And the demographic change is so rapid there. I think it was almost inevitable that there's going to be a pushback, and I think you saw Trudeau toward the end of his time as prime minister, at least rhetorically, kind of trying to walk some of that back. Now, whether that actually translates into truly lower numbers over the long term, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of kind of constant. Once it gets going, it's hard to stop, and momentum there. We'll see, but I'm no expert on Canada.
All right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about, but I should let you go. I think it's a great status update. I love talking to you, Jason, because you bring the facts, whatever your normative views are, and I think that that's the key thing. We should get all the numbers correct in our head to understand what's going on. And I was really frustrated actually by the media in the Biden administration that were saying like, oh, like there's nothing to see here, and this is not exceptional and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, like you might agree with it, but like, come on, like it's exceptional. We know it's exceptional. Like we can see it with our eyes, right? So it's good to start out with facts before we have a position that we're gonna defend here or there. So great conversation. Let's catch up in, I don't know. Let's catch up under the Vance administration or maybe the Ossoff administration. I don't know. I don't know who it's gonna be, but yeah, let's see where we are in 3 or 4 years. All right.
Well, I think in JD's second term, I think we're going to be in good shape. Let's talk then.
Well, I mean, JD's second term, he might send his wife
Right.
back. No, I'm just joking. Yeah. I mean, that's a real mask coming off moment. The long like undercover operation is over. Like. Anyway, I'll talk to you later, bro.
Okay, see ya.
This podcast for kids